What's up, YouTube? It is Wednesday, October 21st, and I've suddenly gotten this idea. Today is my first time playing live in maybe about a week, maybe a little over a week. I'm feeling fairly comfortable with how the casino has structured its games with the plexiglass, with the masks, me wearing his shields as well, that I feel like I can start attending these games more regularly. Both of the boys are at preschool around 10ish every day until 5, so that gives me like a 7-hour window where obviously I can be playing. Previously I've been playing on apps. That's dried up a little bit, and personally I just don't enjoy it as much. So my intention is to start playing live more frequently and make some regular vlogs. So this will be the first day in a series of essentially trying to put out as much content as possible from every single session that I play. So let's jump right into it. When I arrive, I end up posting in the hijack. There are a couple of limps. This is a like maybe half straddle game. I think maybe 4 out of the 9 or 4 out of the 8 people are straddling. Generally speaking, though, obviously I am all for straddles. I think like if every game can have a 3-blind structure, or if they can have an ante, that'd be fantastic. Anyway, so there are a couple of limps to me. I look down at my post to ace queen of spades, and I make it 50. There is a caller, I think, from the blinds, as well as 2 of the limpers, and we go 4 ways to a flop, which comes queen 9-7 with 2 diamonds. There is a spade, so I think I have a backdoor flush draw. It goes check, check, check to me. Obviously, I'm going to be putting in a bet here with top on a draw heavy board. The question is sizing. I decided to bet 140. That might be a little bit too big because I think, obviously, I want to be trying to get calls from king, queen, and queen, jack. I think at this casino, people probably aren't going to be folding those hands, but 140 might be a little too strong. If somebody does have queen, jack here, queen 10, with no like back doors, I think they possibly might fold. Anyway, so the person in the blinds thinks for a bit and folds. I mean, is it possible that he folded a queen? It's possible. I don't think so. And then the next player folds, and now the player to my immediate right tanks for quite some time. Looks like he wants to call, tanks some more, and ends up folding. So yeah, it's possible that I got folds from a worse queen. It's possible that there were some like bad draws, like maybe somebody had a gut shot. Maybe they had like jack 10 for a double gutter and decided that they didn't want to call 140. I don't know. I think on a draw heavy board, obviously I want to be sizing up because there are a plethora of hands that can suck out. And when I just have like one pair, I don't really want to be getting in spots where I'm betting small, some bad runoffs come, and then I really have no idea where I am in the hand. So I think 140 is kind of the sweet spot. Maybe I could have bet like 130, 125, something like that. Anyway, so we win that pot, and right off the bat, we're on the board. Now my next playable hand comes in my straddle, where there's a limp under the gun +1, and then the blinds limp. I look down at ace 10 offsuit in the straddle. The guy that's limping under the gun, my read is he's limping fairly wide. The player thereafter should, not be that strong. You would expect that he would be opening facing a limp if he did have a very good hand. So I decide that I'm going to be squeezing. I make it $60. The under the gun player folds, under the gun +1 calls, and the 2 blinds call. The under the gun +1 player has another maybe 70 or 80 left behind. So I actually thought it was possible that he just gets in, and I obviously don't mind getting in my ace 10 against like his limping range. And that was kind of my goal. So I was kind of hoping that he just ripped it in there. But anyway, he just calls, leaving himself like $80 or $70, something like that. The blinds call, and we go 4 ways to a flop, which comes, I believe, jack 7-8 with a suit. Goes check, check on this board when I just have like a gut shot 4 ways. I think it'd be kind of a miserable idea to be barreling off here. Obviously, like we do have a gut shot. The ace high might be good, but I expect that someone's going to have a draw. Someone's going to have a pair plus draw, maybe some gut shots, maybe some hands like 9-8, jack 10, jack 9 that just aren't going to be folding. Maybe if I was heads up, I would have been in the C bet here, but 4 ways, I think that's just being a little too hopeful. So I decided to check. Now the player who flatted with like the $70 left rips it in. Maybe it was like 65. I don't remember. Something like somewhere around like $60 to $80. He jams it in. The player in the small blind calls. The player in the big blind calls. Now with all that action, there being a flush draw on board, I can't just kind of call with the ace high and the naked gut shot. So I like to fold. The turn is an offsuit king, bringing a second flush draw. And now the small blind checks. The big blind bets like 200. The small blind folds. And the river's a brick. The river's a spade. So the front door flush draw, I believe, gets in there. and the big blind shows king 5 of spades for flopping a flush draw, turning top pair and betting it, and then rivering the flush. The guy that jammed, who actually I think I would have called like this $70 all-in if it had folded to me, ended up having queen 10 for just a naked gut shot. So yeah, unfortunate for me that he didn't just rip it in pre-flop, because I assume if he jams in like his $150 stack, then the blinds fold, I call and end up holding against his queen 10 high. So yeah, unfortunate that that kind of played the way it did. But again, we get to see here what happens, you know, when we're squeezing. I ended up getting called for 50% of a guy's stack with queen 10 offsuit, and another guy calling with king 5 suited. So yeah, people are obviously making very light calls with a pretty wide range, and these kind of hands are going to set me up for some future hands as far as like what my decision making process is, based on what the player to my right with the king 5 suited had shown down. In this next hand, there is a limp, once again, from one of the guys who's been limping a fair amount, and then as well from the player to my immediate right, the one that had won the pot with the king 5 suited. I look down at jack 10 of spades, going to be isolating once again. It's possible, given how active I've been so far, that maybe I should tone it back a little bit, because people are probably hip to what's going on here. But as we know, I like to kind of keep my foot on the pedal. So I make it 50, folds to, I believe, either the smaller blind or the big blind, who calls, and both limpers call as well. We go 4 ways to a flop, which comes 9, 6, 3 with 2 clubs and a spade. So I flop 2 overs, backdoor straight and backdoor flush draw. They all check to me. The first player in the blinds, when it was his action, he kind of just did something funny on the flop that led me to believe that he had something of value, something that he liked. I can be c-betting here, obviously, with just jack high and backdoors. If I get check raise, it's not a big deal. And there's obviously going to be a myriad of cards that I can pick up that are going to make me the best hand. So I think c-betting on this flop is fine, but 4 ways, I just decided that I would try to realize, maybe pick up some one of these draws in position, and, you know, kind of hope to navigate from there. If the turn like breaks off and now checks to me again, then, you know, perhaps I can start barreling off against what I think are going to be some capped ranges. Anyway, so I decided to check it back. The turn is now the 5 of spades, bringing the second flush draw, which is my flush draw, and bringing in the 7-8 nut straight. Now the player in the blinds, who had kind of postured on the flop, it looked like he wanted to bet the flop, now decides to bet. He bets 55, obviously an extremely small bet. Both of the limpers call. And looking at the situation, first of all, I think that the turn better's sizing is obviously extremely suspect. It's really small. I would expect that anything of real value would just be betting larger. There are a bunch of draws. Is it possible that he has just like a set and is afraid of the straights, and so he's, you know, just kind of betting like a sizing where if he gets raised, he's still going to call? Sure, but I just get the feeling that he's not particularly strong. Similarly, the 2 players who called, they seem relatively capped. I think if either of them had a straight, they would be raising the spot with given the draws. And so my thought process here is obviously I could just call it 55, get a decent price to draw to my flush. But I think that it's actually quite possible / likely that one of these players to my right actually has a better flush draw. As we had seen, the player to my immediate right, who limped the king 5 suited, has no problem limping these king high, queen high suited hands, queen 5, queen 6 suited or whatever, on calling raises. So I think it's quite possible that either of them have a draw. And so if I can raise and isolate, I can kind of now take command of the hands, hopefully attack the turn better's lead, get him to fold, and if any of these players are drawing, now when the river breaks off, I can bet again and take down the pot. So after thinking about it for a while, I decided to make it 200. Obviously, if I get jammed on or re-raised here, I'm just going to have to fold, which, you know, isn't a disaster in my opinion. So anyway, now the turn better kind of postures, looks at his hand, kind of shows it to his neighbor and folds. Perfect. The player thereafter, who has now basically a majority of just $100 chips, starts counting them as if he is calculating how much he's in for, or if he makes this call, like how much he's down. It's kind of hard to say exactly what I mean, but if you've ever seen in a game, you'll see people kind of counting from their stack, and they'll see like if they call and lose, like where they are at for the session. It's like some of this like mental barrier that players have, where they're like, well, if I call and lose, how much am I still up? How much am I stuck? How much more am I going to be stuck? So anyway, he counts those down. It looks like he's maybe even possibly going to raise, and ends up just calling. Now the player to his left, the one that's been the action with the king 5 suited, he decides to fold. Kind of the perfect situation, because I think it's quite likely that the player who calls is now just much more likely to be having a draw. And so if the river breaks off, my intention is just kind of bet a moderate amount and win. Is it possible that he has some set or two pair type hand that just isn't going to fold? Sure. So my initial reaction is like, okay, if the river's a brick, I'm just going to rip it for his, like, I think he has like $700 or $800, and he's just going to have to essentially fold everything. Because as I mentioned, I think he's fairly capped here, and unless he really wants to like stack off, I didn't get the notion that anybody here wanted to go broke on this turn. So I feel like if the river breaks off, I can kind of jam all in and be able to take it down. Anyway, the river's an offsuit deuce, which is kind of perfect. Obviously, nothing really gets there. A 4 does make a straight, but you know, how many 4s is he going to have? So once he checks, my only real thought process is what sizing do I want to bet? As I mentioned, I thought originally I was just going to rip it all in, but I realized that I don't really need to do that. If I'm targeting these mixed draws, which, you know, there are a lot of, I don't need to be betting that large. Similarly, though, I don't want to be betting too small, like $200, and give him the opportunity to bluff jam. Because obviously, if I bet $200 in this pot, I think it's going to look like I might have some value hand, like a set that would fold to a jam. There's not many players that are capable of this. We'll get into that a bit later, kind of when I get to the conclusion of the hand. But I don't want to give that window of opportunity. Similarly, I don't want to bet so small that maybe I end up getting heroed by second pair. That's like, oh, well, okay, there's a lot of draws. Maybe he missed. I call. So I decide that somewhere between 350 and 450 is about the right sizing. I elect to bet 400. And as soon as I bet the 400, he instantly throws in like his... I think it's about 800. Maybe it's like $700 chips or $800 chips, and a little bit more, maybe like 720 or 820, something like that. It's pretty much like a min raise jam all in. Obviously, with Jack high, there's nothing I can be doing except folding. Pretty unfortunate. I think there's actually there's a shot that he decided that maybe like my sizing of 400 and the manner in which I did it wasn't very strong, and that he can now turn his hand into a bluff, whatever it happened to be. Obviously, having Jack high, I can't be calling. I don't beat like absolutely anything except like maybe 10-8 of clubs or whatever, the other flush draw that's like 10 high. But obviously I can't be doing anything except folding, so I fold. And a little bit later on, I run into another player that plays there and spoke to him a little bit. And this player, the one that had jammed me on the river, had come up and he had said that he had done this interesting play against him where he check called the flop with like bottom pair, turned a flush draw, and decided to lead into him. So obviously he's capable of doing some interesting things. So is it possible that he jammed this river as a bluff? Possibly. Maybe if I decide to bet 700, then I take that opportunity away from him and he just folds. The quickness with which he did it on the river led me to believe like it's one of those things like, oh, I've got a big hand and like I want you to fold. So it's like it felt like it was weaker than it actually was. Again, with Jack high, I can't do anything except fold. But I'd like to believe most people aren't going to really be taking this line of min raise jamming the river as a bluff. It's just not something anybody really does, especially for such a small size. And like I said, it was only like 300 or 400 more, and I've already bet 400. And also, like, I think it's possible that if he did bluff me, he would just end up showing the hand. So pretty unfortunate that this kind of blows up in my face. Maybe it's possible that he had like 4x of clubs or spades and makes a straight. I would think that those hands would just call, because it is possible that I have 7-8. One of the parts that I didn't go into is, on the turn when I'm raising, I'm essentially just repping 7-8. I don't think I'm repping too much here, but I don't think I necessarily have to in these games. Will people be able to analyze and assess like, oh, I don't think he has 7-8 here very often? I actually think I might have like 7-8 of diamonds or 7-8 of hearts in here and check back on this board where I don't want to get check raised off my equity. There are flush draws, and I might just want to try to realize in a four-handed pot. So I think I still can have some suited, the two suited combinations that are, even the 7-8 of spades, it's the backdoor flush draw. I think I could easily check this back and try to realize as well four-handed, especially once I get the read that the small blind wanted to bet this flop and might essentially be check raising. Because, when the flop comes 9-6-3, there are, in these limp pots, there are going to be the sets of nines, the sets of sixes, the sets of threes. So anyway, we lose that pot, and now we're, I think, stuck like 400 or 500. So now I think it's kind of fairly obvious to the table that I'm being fairly active. I think maybe in the first orbit or two, I've raised to large sizings quite often. In this next hand, there is once again a limp from the player to my immediate right, who's being as active as I am, if not more active. I look down at King Jack off and decide I'm going to be isolating once again. I make it 45. About half the table is straddling. This is one of the straddle pots. It folds to the player who had previously bet the turn on the 9-6-3 turn 5 board, and he calls. I think he calls either out of the straddle or the big blind. I don't remember exactly. And limper calls as well. We go 3 ways to a flop, which comes king 9-7 with 2 hearts. It goes check to me. Obviously flopping top pair here. I want to be betting. I don't want to be betting too large because we do want to be getting action from worse, and we're going to be over-repping our hand if we end up kind of bombing. Though there are a number of draws here, so I have at 75, and now the player in the blinds snap makes it 250. Kind of feels like he's sick of my crap. The player in between folds, and though I don't want to be playing a massive pot here with king jack, I think I can't just be folding just yet. I think a lot of vlogs that I've watched, you hear a lot of this like, oh, okay, well, I have top pair, I'm getting raised, there are draws I can't fold. And I'm not a big fan of that thought process. But given how active I have been and there are draws on this board, I think I could be getting raised lighter than king jack, obviously. So being in position, I think, is obviously also very helpful. So I like to call and kind of reevaluate the turn. The turn is an offsuit deuce. And now he pretty quickly checks in a manner in which it's like, he's like, what are you going to do? He's sort of like pretty quickly just like, okay, I check to you. And when he does this, to me, it's essentially the green light, in my opinion, that I have the best hand here. The only real hand that I'm afraid of, I think, is king queen. For this, sizing of 45 pre, people obviously don't like folding king queen. It's possibly even has ace king and doesn't really know what to do with it. Although, if he has ace king, he's really only afraid of aces. How often am I going to have aces? So when he checks here, I think he's weighted to worse kings as well as draws. I look over at his stack and he has about 700. The pot now is a little bit over 600. And after thinking over it a bit, I decided that he's just going to have way more draws. And similarly, if he has a hand like king queen, it's going to be really hard for him to call off all in here, so I can get that hand to fold. And if he has king jack for chop, I can get that hand to fold as well. So I like to just rip it in there for the 700. And he thinks for, I'd say, less than 10 seconds and calls fairly quickly. At this point, I just roll my hand over because I did get called, and I have top pair, so I'm just going to be showing my hand down nonetheless. And when I roll my hand over, he kind of jumps out of his seat and like shakes his head, and I was like, oh wow, like I think he actually has a worse king. The river is, I believe, another deuce pairing the board. Let me make sure. Yeah, I think it's another deuce pairing the board. And so he ends up rolling over king 10. I think it was king 10 of diamonds, king 10 suited. So the kicker does play. And we win a pretty massive pot here for king jack versus king 10. I think I've played the hand fine. I think he's kind of put in a precarious situation because of how active I've been. I think he was just kind of sick of my crap. This board is fairly draw heavy, and he was just like, okay, I have top pair, I'm not going to be folding to this maniac. But I think this hand illustrates the positives that can occur from being aggressive, right? If I had limped this hand behind after the limper, or raised smaller, not been as active as I have been, this hand would have never ballooned to this sizing. And I wouldn't be able to, I think, assess the situation correctly. Because of the way the hand played, I think it's fairly obvious to me on the turn that either A, he's got a worse king, or that he has a draw. And so now I get to apply maximum pressure and putting kind of the onus on him to make a difficult decision. So yeah, I mean, maybe sizing wise, like I could have went a little bit smaller if I'm trying to eke out value from the worst kings, although I don't think there are that many worse kings really, right? Like he should have like maybe king 10 suited, maybe king 8, king 6, king 5 suited at worst, but there's not many people that are going to be calling raises with those hands. So I'm essentially just targeting the hearts or the king 10. So I think this hand is also an example of like variance, right? I could have ran into king queen. If I'm running into king 10, I could have very easily ran into king queen just the same. If he has king queen, which I think he possibly could, I'm gonna end up getting stacked here, and that obviously would be unfortunate. So that is like something that can't be overlooked in this situation. Like I'm obviously running good when I end up running into king 10 suited instead of like king queen off or king queen suited. So yeah, very fortunate to kind of play this massive $2,000+ pot with the king jack versus king 10. And right after that hand, now we are unstuck and showing a little bit of profit. Now in this hand, I am the straddle. It folds all the way to the big blind, who is the active player to my immediate right. He limps. I look down at 9-7 suited. I had just played this big pot not too long ago with the king jack and decided to keep my foot on the gas. I make it $60, probably a little bit too big, but I like the idea of, putting your foot on people's throats and just kind of ramming and jamming and keeping up the aggression. So I make it 60. He now calls. We go heads up to a flop, which comes jack 10-9 rainbow. He checks. I decide to check it back. obviously I could be betting here, but having the pair, the gut shot, I don't want to be getting check raised off of it, and I don't really know exactly what worse hands I can be getting calls from. So I decided to pot control and check it back. The turn is a 9, obviously Yahtzee. He bringing a flush draw. He now bets, I think, 50 or 60. Obviously, with trips, I'm not going anywhere. The question is, should I be raising? And I think that I make a mistake here by just calling. Raising and getting 3-bet on this board would be gross, but you're just not going to find that it's going to be done by worse. Obviously, you could have like jacks here, 10s, 10-9 for the boats. You could have flopped a straight. And so it would suck to have to fold out my equity against like straights, but I think it would be a fairly easy fold. So I like raising here. Anyway, I just called. The river is the ace of spades, and now he decides to check. So the question is, can I be going for value and for how much? I decide, because of the fact that the backdoor flush gets there, that sometimes he's going to have those on a paired board. He's going to be check calling them. That I'm not exactly sure that if I bet what I'm going to be targeting. I think if I bet, I'd be targeting hands like ace king, ace queen, which he shouldn't have that often. Maybe obviously ace jack. Worse jacks like jacks like jack queen, king jack, which on this run out shouldn't be calling too often. And so I decide that I don't think that there's much value to be had here, and I check it back, and we end up getting shown ace king for like top rivering top, which pretty interesting to me. Obviously, the way he played it, instead of just opening it and not getting, or even if he's going to be limping, not limp 3-betting. So we end up winning here, and obviously given what he had, we've lost some value. I think that it's quite likely that I could have bet somewhere between like 70 to 110 and gotten called, especially by this player, especially given what he has. Like, he's just not going to be check folding this river, right? So we did miss some value, and not just to be results oriented. I think I should be just betting this river, bet folding. Like, no one's really capable of check raising this river as a bluff, and so there's no reason that I can't be going for some value here. At the time, I kind of thought to myself that, given the exact runoff, that there wasn't much value to be had. Like, he'd have to have a very specific hand, like ace 10, ace jack, and I just didn't think he would have that very often. But I still think it's something that I should be seeking, and obviously I did end up missing a bit of value. So a precursor to this hand, there is a raise to 20 from the regular. I called from the small blind with ace jack. He checks back like a queen 8-4 board with 2 7s. The turn is a 4. I now bet 20 and he calls. The river's a brick. I check and he checks back and wins with 7s, which leads us to this hand where I can't remember if he limps under the gun or if he's in the blinds. But he limps. There's another limp. I have ace king suited and make it 40. He calls, as well as another player. The flop ends up coming 8-6 deuce, I think, with a suit. I end up flopping 2 overs and a backdoor flush draw. On the flop, this regular kind of looks like he wants to bet, contemplates for a bit and checks. And when he does this, to me, this is just like always like pocket 9s, pocket 7s, pocket 5s that thinks they have the best hand, should be betting and don't know really what to do, and are trying to get me to check back. That's kind of my read of the situation. I feel like it's just always what this is. The action player to my right checks, and I decided to just check it back, just for these reasons that I feel like, obviously I have a draw to what I think is always going to be the best hand if I turn an ace or a king, and it's just a situation that at this point I'm already kind of mentally locking it up and don't want to be playing a big pot in a spot where I just have ace high. So I check it back. The turn is a 6 of spades pairing the board, now giving me a flush draw. The regular bets, I think, like 55 or 60. The player in between folds, and I think I have a pretty clear just call here. Raising here would be like pretty ambitious. Like, I'm not really sure what I'm trying to rep as played. So I like to just call. The river's an offsuit 10, 9-7 gets there, but how often am I going to have that and not just be c-betting this board? Not very often. He now checks. I could have possibly taken this line with like pocket queens or pocket jacks that just don't want to inflate the pot, but I just don't think that's occurring very often. I think that if he has a hand like 7s or 9s, he's just looking to check call in this exact spot. So I decide it's not very likely that I'm going to be winning, but I decided to kind of check it back and likely lose. I check it back and once again lose to his pocket 7s. And both of these hands are kind of precursors or kind of a sign to me that I'm not playing very well. I think both of these hands are situations I could have won. The ace jack from the small blind, I could just, versus his like middle position late open, I could just be 3-betting and winning this pot. When I 3-bet, he calls and c-bet this flop. And suddenly this ace king suited, if I just c-bet this flop and then bet the turn, I think it's quite likely he's just going to be folding the 7s. So given kind of like how passively I'm playing, I decided that the game's just not that great. The player to my right, who's been a ton of action, has actually left now 2 or 3 times from the table for multiple orbits, only to come back, play a hand or 2, and then leave again. So the game just doesn't feel that great. And so I just decided to lock it up and book the $1,002 winner. Obviously a nice session, especially given that I was stuck like 600 right off the bat. So kind of a good return to playing regularly again, and hopefully this continues. It's time for me to pick up Charlie and Benjamin. That's all for now, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks.